Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Streelman, and I'm the chair of Biological Sciences here at Georgia Tech. I want to welcome you all to this town hall presentation titled Surveillance Testing, Updates, and Early Interpretations. We have a few speakers today. The first is Greg Gibson, professor in the School of Biological Sciences and director for the Center of Integrative Genomics. Next is Joshua Weitz, professor in the School of Biological Sciences and director of the Quantitative Biosciences Ph.D. program. We also have joining us today Alexa Harter, who is director of the CIPHER lab at GTRI. Alexa is here to answer questions and provide comment on the Novid app for contact tracing. The goal of this presentation today is to provide the community some updates and interpretation of the early rounds of surveillance testing and to answer questions. I'll just remind you that there's a chat function with this Blue Jeans events profile, and you should just use that for comment. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. So with that, I'll mute myself and turn it over to Joshua.
Thanks, Todd. Actually, we're going to go to Greg first. Greg, if you have unmuted your mic.
Yes, I'm live.
All yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Joshua and Todd, and thank you all for joining us once again. So great to have this opportunity to chat about the status of things with you. I just wanted to start by reminding everybody that this is actually a massive team project with more than 30 individuals, actually more like 50 people individuals, supported by the Office of the President and the director of the Parker Petit Institute here at Georgia Tech, led by Andres Garcia. So the leader of this project is Mike Shannon on the top left there, assisted by Mike Farrell, Anton Brixson, and Dalia Gulick, the core managers who've really stepped up. Julianne Williamson and Alex Ortiz have led the logistics of all the sampling that everybody's getting. And we have a clear director, Emily Ryan. Brian Liu has taken over the IT leadership. And there's just many people involved and working, frankly, around the clock, many 12, 14-hour days for the last 3 weeks without a break. So thanks absolutely to everybody. Okay, next, thanks, Joshua. So just a reminder of what the objective here is, it's to limit the spread of COVID-19 by removing at least an equivalent fraction of new cases as those who would otherwise increase due to the exponential nature of spread. So for example, if R0 is 1.5, then we need to remove about 50% of the cases that arise each week to keep us at a steady state. Otherwise, 100 new cases will become 150 next week, and then 225 the week after, and so forth. So we need to find and isolate about 50 cases a week if we start out at 100 on campus. And that requires large-scale screening on the level of around about 1,500 people a day to cover half of all campus every week at least. And the good news is we've got to that point. Technically, we can do it, and the program is actually working extremely efficiently. Just remember what your obligations are. It's to visit either Bobby Dodd Stadium or the Curran Street parking deck on the west, near the West residences. Or there's a new mobile site, which currently this week is in Tech Square, which is meant deliberately to attract people coming into campus from off campus. So you pre-register at the mytest.gartech.edu site that I've got on the bottom right-hand side there. And you turn up at the testing site with your buzz card and the barcode that's displayed on the app once you've registered. And you're just going to donate a simple saliva sample, which takes about 15 minutes all up. And those sites are running around from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock, 5 days a week. And then we're aiming to get the tests turned around in 24 to 48 hours to you. And that is happening now. Next, thanks, Joshua. So there's a picture of the laboratory that was set up. We called it our Black Ops site down in the basement of EBB. In surveillance mode, what we're doing is screening 225 people at a time in a 96-well plate. That means we set up 15 sets of 15 people and each person is in a unique pair of pools of 5 individuals in that set. And what it means is that we're able to directly identify who's positive and then follow up. So on the right-hand side there, you actually see a picture of what we see at the end of each run. So that the curves there are what are called PCR profiles, and the idea is you want the curve to go up above the red line. So the red are the actual viral tests, and the blue are, in that case, 90 different positive control for human RNA, so that tells us that the reaction worked. And so in that particular case, there's just 2 red lines, and we can go in and home in on them, and it turns out that you can just look at one of them, and you see that side by side there's a positive red next to the positive control blue. And if there's 2 of those in a row of 6 wells, then we know exactly who it is. And it turns out that every time that's happened, we've been able to validate that that person was positive for the coronavirus in their system. Next. So I do need to actually want to address a couple of initial challenges, and in fact apologize to the community for some things that didn't quite go right in the first few days, not surprisingly. We rapidly wrapped up from a few dozen samples to over 500 a day in the first weekend. The initial delay, many of you experienced waiting for about 5 days to get your first results, and the reason for that is that we actually had to completely rebuild the secure web server over the weekend. Again, a team working around the clock to do that. I imagine you can certainly readily appreciate that we had to address cybersecurity concerns. We certainly don't want people breaking in and giving false connections to the data or sending out insecure data. So we made sure we got that right, and that's what caused that 5-day delay, which we're sorry for. The other thing that happened is that there was initial registration problems. So we had a DocuSign system set up, but that was actually crashing for many of you. About 25% of initial registrations didn't work. So we replaced that with a single-click consent process, and that's going much, much more smoothly. And I guess many of you are having issues with redoing the survey. We'll look into maybe making that a single access survey from now on. So really, your feedback is critical for improving this process. We want as many people as possible to be participating, and so don't hesitate to email me at any time, and we will, or Mike Shannon, or anyone else on the team, and we will heed your advice. Yep. Next, please. Yeah. Okay, so the data so far. So you can access this at the mytest.gartech.edu site. There's a banner at the top of the page, which links out to our running tally. And we will be again building this up over the coming days. I've just cut and pasted their results from first thing this morning. So there's 25 positives, and I can't read that on my screen, 6,300, I think, tests performed. Okay, so that rate, overall rate, is close to 0.4%. Underneath that banner, you'll see the plot of a sliding window of sets of 900 samples that have been evaluated. So we started out the first weekend at around about 0.5, 0.6%, and then it dropped down precipitously to 0.1%. They actually had 4 plates in a row with no positives on them, which was disturbing for a while, and now it's been picking back up to back to 0.4%. In a minute, I'll discuss what might be going on with that. On the left, you can actually see the number of samples tested per day, as well as the average turnaround time. And so you can see we've got it down that we are now intaking, I think today was in fact the biggest day we've had yet, something like 1,500 tests with a lab of half a dozen people working down there, and we're turning those around in the same day as sampling. We can actually attempt to get the no further action required email to 99% of people who participated in the study. And then it's maybe taking an extra 24 hours at most to follow up with diagnostic evaluations. So the whole thing is really kicked into gear due to the efforts of Mike Shannon and his team downstairs. So how do we interpret this 0.4%? It's actually much, much lower than we thought. We thought that maybe it would be 2% based on data coming in from Michigan State and based on the high incidence here in Georgia and Florida and places. So one way you could look at it is saying, well, the incidence just is really low. And if that were the case, if you really believed it was just 0.4%, then unfortunately many people may be incentivized just to carry on as if there's only a 1 in 200 chance of getting sick. I really want to emphasize we do not think that that's what's happening at all. So there are a number of indicators for that. Another possibility is the test is not sensitive enough, but we run controls on every plate. In every case, they've worked. We've done extensive evaluations of the pooling strategy. We know it's working. So we really don't think that it's not that it's under sampling or under testing. And we've compared our test to the CBS test that was on campus for most of the summer. And in fact, we know that it's much more sensitive than that. So it's not a testing accuracy problem. We think it's a very accurate test. We're quite confident in that. So what else might be happening? So another possibility is that in fact, what we're doing is not sampling the high-risk population fully. So a few indications of that. One is that in fact, about a third of our contemporary current tests are actually repeat tests. So we know that there's a pool of individuals who are coming back second, sometimes third, and even in a few cases, fourth visits already. So people are coming back every 4 or 5 days. And more of the tests are those people who, most of whom, if not all of whom, are negative. So that's reducing the pool of new individuals, although it's growing back up now. The other possibility, which we're concerned about, is that we're actually not sampling the high-risk population. Okay, and Joshua is going to address this in his portion. These two plots here are showing testing rates by dormitory and by Greek house as of Tuesday of this week. They've actually picked up in the Greek houses today, which is great news. But the blue bars there are the number of registered or tested participants, and the orange bars there are the number who we know are living in those houses or dorms and have not registered or not tested. So you see at the left-hand end of each figure, there are some houses where you've got close to 100% participation. In fact, the top 5 in each are over 80%. And then to the right, you've got houses where the participation is pretty much close to zero, and certainly the bottom 5 or 10 in each case are less than 20%. There's a wide range of participation, and if those houses are the ones where we're building up cases and not testing them, then pretty much all of this is I'm not going to say for naught, but you're building up a community of people who are going to eventually lead to outbreaks. So I'm going to stop there and let Joshua pick up from that point and talk about just what sort of sampling we need and what sort of participation we need to be effective going forward.
Okay. Thanks, Greg, and you can confirm that you can hear me.
Yep, I can.
Perfect. So just to, again, put in context, many of you have heard this term before. I just want to repeat it, this notion of R naught or R effective, the average number of new infection caused by a single infectious individual in a population, and when the rest of the population is susceptible, we call that R naught, otherwise it's effective. Now keep in mind that value, which gives you a sense of the potential strength of an individual to infect others, is really a product of how many infections are caused per time times the infectious period. And this gives you a sense that an individual who's infectious might come in contact with others. They may contact someone who's susceptible. And then also there's a chance that given that contact, it can lead to a transmission. So that idea also underlies a whole bunch of rationales for really integrative efforts to control, which is there are many ways to try to reduce the infectious period, and some of those may be available, but of course there are many non-pharmaceutical interventions we want to deal in advance of hospitalization or direct treatment, particularly in the event that such treatment is not available like we have really for COVID-19. We need to focus on these non-pharmaceutical, non-hospital interventions. And so how do we do that? First of all, we might want to reduce contacts by infectious individuals. An ideal way to do that is to test and then isolate infectious individuals, even if they're asymptomatically or pre-symptomatically infected. So that just reduces the chance that they come in contact with someone in the event that they're infectious, perhaps unknown. Next, in the event that they're moving around in contact, by having distancing, physical distancing, by having online equivalents, that means that that person hasn't been isolated, but they're less likely to come in contact with a susceptible individual. And then to the extent to which they have come in contact, this is why, in addition, I guess that's one of the key points here, in addition to the testing strategy, which we're focusing on today, it is not the only thing. That process engineering and importantly mass PPE that are now required here on campus are another way to reduce new spread. So that's a bit of the context. With respect to testing, which we often hear about through the lens of confirmatory diagnosis or getting some indication, often an under indicator of the true extent of the disease and its spread, we're trying to use testing here at Georgia Tech, like a few other places, including University of Illinois, really as a means to mitigate. And the principle here is, you can imagine, there are individuals who are susceptible, some of who are exposed but not yet infectious, others who are infectious, whether symptomatically or asymptomatically, and then the majority, particularly in the young adult population, will recover, but of course not all, and particularly with older individuals, those with comorbidities, and some maybe with no known comorbidities, not all will recover, may be hospitalized or worse. The idea of testing as a mitigation strategy is you take some infectious individuals, and if you can identify them early, they're removed in the sense from circulating with other individuals, and thereby reducing the probability of a new infection. In prior work that I talked about in a earlier town hall, we took this concept and then modeled it in the kind of context that we thought might unfold in a university setting. And you see here in these heat maps, the x-axis is this R0 number, which we think because of non-pharmaceutical interventions we can drive to the left. And the y-axis is the testing frequency in days. How frequently do individuals go back for testing? And I think it should be clear that we want to get into these bottom left corners. And the two differences here are how sensitive the test is, and we think actually we're doing very well on sensitivity. So these were conservative estimates. And both of these contour maps indicate, including entry testing, when people arrive. And entry testing is important because it removes even this initial pool. But it's not the only thing, because we're part of Atlanta, we're part of a larger community. Even if entry testing had been comprehensive, then there would still be new importation of cases. So the real takeaways here, as we thought about moving in, was to try to keep the effective reproduction number low, right, wearing masks, but also to emphasize speed, not only the sensitivity of the test, which thankfully we actually have quite high, but also the speed. And the speed makes sure that we're continuing to get people out of circulation, removing those new contacts. Now I want to get into this question of a little bit more granularity directly related to that last slide of Greg with respect to dormitories and other residents, including Greek houses on campus. How much should we test in practice? I've given here two hypothetical scenarios. 100 individuals, and on the left there's already a large outbreak, meaning 15 concurrent infected individuals at a given time, and on the right an incipient outbreak, 4 infected out of 100. The question is, how many people do we have to test to identify the fact that there is something anomalous, meaning the situation on the right is not typical? As we've already said, baseline rates seem to be about 0.4, 0.5%. We expected 1 to 2%. If we're already at 4, that is a highly unlikely situation just as independent cases, but rather is likely to indicate an outbreak, meaning linked cases. And we want to avoid the situation becoming like that on the left when we have a large-scale outbreak. So how many do we have to test? One way to see that is to imagine we do some partial testing. We tested a certain block here. And on the right, we find one individual, and we know we're going to find one individual occasionally, even when looking at smaller samples. And on the left, we find 3, which we certainly would view as anomalous. The problem is, on the right, it is an anomalous situation. It is an incipient outbreak, and we might not know. So how can we actually formalize this? What I've done here is lay out on the left, and I'll explain this in some detail, a scenario by which I've explored on the x-axis the number of individuals that one tests, and on the y-axis the probability that by testing that many individuals you found 3 or more cases. In other words, you had an early warning sign that there was an outbreak. The point that I'm making here is, you can see, if the outbreak only has 4 cases, it requires, to be sure, meaning 95% of the time we're going to catch it, we have to test 90% or more of individuals to find those 3 or 4 cases and recognize that there's something anomalous. Whereas, if the outbreak has already reached 15 out of 100 in this particular residence, we only have to test about 35% of the individuals to almost certainly realize that there's something anomalous. But by then, it's too late. So the central message here is that if we want to detect incipient outbreaks, before they become large, then we have to have high levels of compliance and testing. In this case, 90% or more. In other words, we're really aiming here for comprehensive testing. And the purpose is to protect everyone in that residence and, in fact, the larger community. So by getting tested, not only are you protecting yourself, but also this is an act of empathy with respect to others. And we're hoping that to get these kind of high levels of compliance within each residence hall, because we're aware that residence halls, these sort of high density, even at reduced densities, but relatively speaking, higher density live-learn environments are more likely to lead to clustered outbreaks. We're trying, therefore, to catch them earlier, isolate individuals, and therefore reduce risk for others. And so the message here, which I hope is clear, is that surveillance testing really needs to be comprehensive to identify and isolate cases, and really to include all those who access campus buildings. I'll focus here on these residency contexts. To keep in mind, just going back to something that Greg already mentioned, 6,300 tests identifying 25 positives, which were then confirmed. Obviously, these 25 are confirmed through follow-up diagnostic testing. This already is reducing risk to the community. This is already a success. But yet, what about cases we have not yet identified? Simply by extrapolation, even without community spread, we expect there may be 50, 75 or more cases we haven't identified yet, which means it is critical to continue not just entry testing, but repeat testing. Again, all those who live, learn on campus, and those who come to work regularly as well. This is a critical phase of the epidemic. You're probably aware of the larger context going on in Georgia, which I haven't discussed here at length, and you can read about whether in the AJC or in other outlets. But it's clear that there's significant community spread, one of the highest rates state-wise per capita in the nation. And that also suggests that default modes of face-to-face learning right now are not feasible. And the vast majority of learning modes right now are hybrid, including remote. And the point that I'm also trying to make here is that large-scale surveillance testing is really part of an integrated effort. It is not in and of itself sufficient. Because as you saw, by reducing R naught, which is really often driven by non-pharmaceutical interventions, things like masks and distancing, that helps to get more power out of the testing we do implement here on campus. And again, this is the central purpose here is to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in the campus community amidst elevated rates statewide. So just to sum up in terms of 4 major points. In terms of testing, there's been an incredible effort by many, logistics and the laboratory side and the communication side, and the work is not done. We need to build upon this entry testing to continue to support this repeat testing at least weekly. That is the ideal. The reason and rationale is to remove cases from circulation and reduce outbreak size, detecting incipient outbreaks so we can stop them before they become large outbreaks. Continue to reinforce the fact that testing is not a single silver bullet kind of strategy. It is integrative and works more effectively if the baseline rates of spread are already lower, which are made possible by mask wearing, including other things like reducing indoor gatherings, avoiding large outdoor gatherings if social distancing is not possible, and finding these other alternatives. And continuing to reinforce the fact, I think this week in particular, it's understood that online is the default mode. We're continuing to recommend that even in these hybrid courses, that they can include occasional face-to-face at distance interactions, and that may increase as conditions warrant. But given the fact that we have not yet comprehensively sampled and tested the community, and given elevated rates, we're recommending that online should be the default mode. And again, as conditions warrant, as we learn more, as we test more, hopefully reducing circulating cases, that can become more feasible. So that is the entirety of the slide deck, because we wanted to make sure to leave a significant amount of time for questions with respect predominantly on the surveillance testing, but maybe on other topics as well. So I'll stop the slides there.
Okay, we have a number of questions in the Q&A, and we'll take a look at these. I think we'll start maybe with one that's based on the multiple testing modalities on campus. So there's a few questions here about how does one find the number of positives in a certain day? And so I know that STAMPS is testing, and then you guys are doing surveillance testing, and probably the athletes are being tested in a completely different way. So which is the website that says how many tests there are for a certain day?
So for the surveillance testing, the website is the MyTest, so the link out from the MyTest one, and we will actually be putting up daily test rates on that. Here now it's been cumulative to now because the daily wasn't that useful, but that will carry on. Those tests are reported to STAMPS and they're incorporated into the statistics they're presenting, so that the ones you get at STAMPS are combining our tests and the STAMPS tests as well. You've probably also seen that there is a Fulton County site that's popped up at McCamish Pavilion on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so that's there just closing down right now. That's not part of our testing, but the real number is so you can look, you can see it goes in multiples of 225 because that's what a 96 well plate holds with room for controls, and those get updated by Mike every morning around about 8 o'clock. And so that's where you go to sort of see what's happened that day. As I say, we're also planning on getting some more graphics as time goes by, and we're comfortable with how granular we can report the data safely and securely.
And just to add on to that, if I may, which is that the STAMP site also has a health alerts because this is a diagnostic program, surveillance program, and the confirmations via diagnosis are then related to STAMPs. The data on the MyTest site will say something like 25 right now out of 6,300. And I want to repeat, that means that 6,300 individual samples were tested under the surveillance testing program. And of those, 25 individuals who participated in that program were confirmed positive through diagnostic testing. And those 25 will then, with time, show up with more detailed information that is still at the level of granularity that STAMPS has been reporting and will be included in the total number. But there may be other people who were symptomatic, who went directly to STAMPS or through other mechanisms are included. So the number of the total positives on the STAMP site will be greater than this. So this 25 is really giving you a sense predominantly of those asymptomatic individuals who we identified via this surveillance program.
Asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic. But what we're emphasizing is that you shouldn't regard that as an accurate estimate of the number of people on campus, because you should ask yourself what happened to get that drop from 0.4% to 0.1%. That's epidemiologically extremely unlikely. And so we're concerned that people thought, well, maybe it's not in my interest to get tested, and that we mitigated against a large section of campus community. So if we're not sampling the entirety of campus, then we're not getting a really good reflection of what the incidence is across the whole campus. So don't take 0.4% as the number. It's a number. It's the number for the people who volunteered to go and get tested.
Okay, so somewhat related to this, there's questions about what happens after this, after surveillance test reveals a positive. And so just heard you guys say that surveillance test reveals a potential positive, and then there's a diagnostic test. Could you just run through that procedure of the diagnostic test occurs where, and then there'll be a few questions about the tracing of contacts.
So the diagnostic test happens in the CLIA lab. So the Mikes managed to get what's called an emergency use authorization submitted. That's in process. It'll be considered by the FDA in the coming weeks. So we are allowed to proceed with the CLIA lab that we've established. Once we are confident that a sample is positive, we then report that. And the record right now is, I think, 27 hours to STAMPS. And then Dr. Holton's team will then reach out to an infected person and let them know that they're positive. So far, most of those individuals, I'm told, have elected to return home to convalesce or to isolate. In fact, not necessarily convalesce. Almost all of them have been asymptomatic. A few have become symptomatic. And it turns out that a few were previously positive. And so the virus we're detecting at very sensitive levels is in their system from infections 3 or 4 weeks ago. The CDC recommendations are that people can go back to work 10 days after the initial diagnosis because their feeling is that the viral titer is low enough at that point that a person is not seriously infectious. So that's what happens. And then also there's this option to for the individual to report their positive status to the Novid app. And so that's actually a good segue that maybe Alexa Harter can comment on what happens in terms of contact tracing.
Certainly. So I'd be happy to. So in terms of contact tracing, there's both manual contact tracing that will be done by the Georgia Department of Public Health in coordination with stamps. But then there's also the Novid app, which we're encouraging everybody in the community to download. And essentially what Novid does is if 2 users actually have the phones in close proximity, it exchanges a synthetic code. So it's a way of tracking sort of everybody that people have been in close contact with. Then if someone actually tests positive, they can get a code from stamps and press a button that then alerts everybody they've been in close contact with. The advantage of Novid is that while manual contact tracing allows you to sort of note everybody that you know you've been in contact with, what Novid will do is pick up all of those contacts who you don't necessarily know that you've been nearby. So if you're working out in the gym and someone's on a piece of equipment nearby, you obviously don't know their name. But if you're both running the Novid app, then you'll have the ability to actually alert those people. So far, we have about a little over 3,000 users of Novid. So this is pretty good adoption so far, although it'd be great if we could get further adoption. So I'm happy to take specific questions, but that's kind of a very high level overview.
Thank you, Alexa.
There's also the option that you can get retested yourself, either with our test or at stamps or somewhere else. If you don't really trust your result, get retested. That's fine. Okay,
this is for Greg and Josh. There are a number of questions here about the science is very clear, and your point is that we're under testing. So what are the strategies now to reach this 90% point that we understand from the presentation we want to reach? How do we get into these dorms where folks aren't participating?
Well, ideally we do it with carrots rather than sticks. So I think student peer pressure is a very, very critical part of this. So spread the word that it's important, that the process is safe and effective and simple. I guess walking across campus in 90-degree heat for 15 minutes is not that pleasant, but that's the worst part of it. Almost everybody who goes there has a good experience, that it's quick and it's courteous, and it only takes about 5 minutes once you're there. We're also doing everything we can to increase the number of sites. So the wait times at those sites are very short. In fact, there's about 12 stations at each. Certainly at the Bobby Dodd, there's 12 stations, so the wait times are very short. There's a new site, as I mentioned, in Tech Square. And then there are other options under discussion to sort of maybe expand the number of testing sites. There are some incentive programs. I think there's some Starbucks cards available for people if they participate. And there's a whole team, actually, the president or the Frank Neville, the chief of staff of the president, has actually set up a working group that are looking into a bunch of different ways that we can increase participation. Joshua maybe has some different ideas on this.
Yeah, so let me just add to that one thought, which is that there's this very good initial launch, but as we pointed out, it's not going to be sufficient. And we have to continue to increase the entry of new people who haven't yet done the testing before. And I think the good news is, as Greg pointed out, the logistics have been streamlined. The time between getting the test and getting result has been decreased. The time we're at the site, having gone through this myself, and I hope most people on this call have gone through it, is seamless and easy. And the use of the saliva-based test means that with respect to even the testing, it's non-invasive. But now let me also just point out some larger issues, which is whether we're talking about masks or we're talking about testing. The reality is that it sometimes is simply hard to get to that 90 above percentile strictly with carrots. And so I think this is something that we have to be able to raise openly. And so I'm going to raise it and say that having mandatory programs can be linked. As you know, there are many times when we'd like to use email, but if you haven't done your correct training, then maybe you get locked out or you haven't changed your password. And the students know this, and the faculty and staff, we know it, and there's a lot of such training going on to make sure that we remain in compliance. I think that has to be on the table. We've made suggestions. I think people have heard those suggestions, and they recognize the intent of those suggestions, which is there are ways to connect a buzz card which you're using to sign in with other access points. And I will point out that UIUC has made a link between access to building and campus and test compliance. So there are ways that I think that if we find from the science side that the compliance levels in terms of test levels, because it's so critical, I hope we've explained it, and our hope throughout has been to explain the rationale for why we want this high compliance. If we want to be able to detect incipient outbreaks, we have to be at a 90% or above. And really, we're aiming for 100%. Otherwise, an outbreak in one place will spread to the community. And that will be deeply problematic and risk many. So I just want to reinforce that point. And I think that also reduces some sense the advantage of a common mandate. Then it reduces a sense of like, oh, don't pressure me to do that, or I don't know how I feel about it. It can become just a part of what our practice is here to move things forward. So my hope is that we're going to get to 90 to 100% one way or another, but we should at least be thinking about linking test status with some access points or other ways to provide feedback that, again, keeps individual your status won't be broadcast whether you've tested or not, but there has to be some way of providing feedback to that individual, also to remind them, to encourage them. Remember, it's been 5 days. You can go back and within the next couple of days, go get tested again.
So, yeah, I mean, personally, I would love to see it that you don't get into a classroom unless you've tested negative in the previous 3 or 4 days and actually had your Novid app on and shown that you've not had contacts. I don't find anything restrictive about that, but they're the sort of ideas that are on the table, and that are, pressure from you guys would really help. If you have ideas, bring them on, and we'll consider them. One of the psychological things is that people respond to things that are positive, immediate, and certain. You eat an ice cream because you know you're going to enjoy it straight away, without much doubt. But this testing is anything but that. It's usually negative. It's deferred for some time, and there's a lot of doubt around it, just like genetic testing. So, we find there are battles we've got to fight. But, there are campuses that started out at close to our rate with surveillance programs, Michigan State, and they're shut down now. So if we want this to carry on, then we have to be really vigilant and not get complacent about the relatively low starting number.
Yeah, and I know we're taking a long time to answer this question, but I think it's worthwhile and now we're just piggybacking, which is that masks have become a mandate. And so again, to put it bluntly, to get up to compliance, the most straightforward route would be to connect it to buzz card and entry status into campus buildings. And again, we recognize that some folks may not want to get tested because they're worried. What happens if it's positive and then I've got to go home or I've got to quarantine? That is true. It is true. On the other hand, the positive side is by doing that, you will have protected others if you are infected unknowingly, unwittingly, because you're asymptomatic. And I hope that that message can overcome the other message, which is the potential negative consequence of being positive. But it may take, and really, given the numbers now, we have to move fast. a mandate to make sure that this becomes a repeated social norm. I'll stop there.
Yeah, so a related question, I think that this fits right into the discussion you guys just had. Very good discussion. Let's talk about capacity for a minute. So if we did this, if the proposal was to turn this into a mandate or even a half mandate, talk a little bit about the capacity once again, Greg. How many tests can you do a day? How many tests are you doing a day? In other words, you have capacity to do more right now.
Yeah, we're limited by two things. Staffing, which we've got another 3 people about to be hired, and we've got a bunch of work study students going to come in and help us with some of the early steps. And supplies. I mean, everybody across America is trying to increase their testing capacity. So things like tips and solutions are running short. So we're tech, we're finding new solutions, but it's a bit of a challenge. That said, we can maintain our 1,500, and we think we can raise that to 2,500. You may not wish me to say that, but I think that if we dream hard and we push, that it's not impossible to think that we can regularly be screening 10,000 or 12,000 a week, which is getting up to half the people on campus, and it's sort of where we'd like to be, but it's pretty good, pretty damn good, I think.
And let me ask one more addition to that, which is to think about risk stratification, and then I'll maybe turn over to Alexa afterwards to talk about getting more signups on the Novid app, which is that even at 1,500 a day, 5 days a week, that's 7,500. With a little bit more capacity, perhaps a 6-day-a-week schedule, accessing, as Greg said, 10 to 12,000 is within the reach. Even right now, operationally, it's 7,500. Keep in mind there are about 6,000 individuals who are residents on campus, which means that within that group, which with respect to risk is the highest, and if you also include those who are working full-time, whether in facilities, staff, et cetera, who need to have repeat testing, we're getting to the point already where that need can be met, and then additional need can be met with scale-up. So whereas I think at the very outset, the first few days, given the reason we described, that probably would not have been feasible, it is feasible now. So if one made that mandate, actually could be followed through on the logistics side. And Alexa, I don't know if you want to talk about the sign-up rate. You said greater than 3,000. If there's any capacity issues there, I can't imagine there is on the Novid app, but you might have something to add.
Yeah, no, let me say a couple of things on that. So no, there's no capacity issues on the Novid app, and definitely encourage as many people as possible to sign up. One thing I will say is that one advantage of the Novid app is that if you have a smaller community, so if you're a dorm or a frat, if you can get a large adoption just in that smaller community, you're sort of protecting your smaller community. So you don't necessarily need a huge percentage across campus to protect your own very local community. So please encourage, if you're in a small group where you have maybe higher interaction with people, encourage everybody in that group to download the app, and you'll really protect that smaller community. The Novid app is detecting interactions. I did see one question in the app, in the chat about concerns that maybe the app isn't actually detecting things. So one actually just word of advice there. So Apple actually makes it so that you cannot use Bluetooth unless the app is operating in the foreground. So now Novid has actually made a sort of screensaver that you just need to like trigger before you start walking around campus. And so that's something you need to do, or it will have trouble picking up detections. So that's one sort of user advice in order to increase the interaction and the number of contacts that it actually does log. But yeah, in terms of, there's no capacity issues with downloading Novid. Please encourage people in your local community to download it. So with that, I'll turn it back.
Okay, a set of questions here, Greg probably about who should be tested and how often. And I know you've said this before, but it's probably good to repeat. So for individuals who are known to have been COVID positive, should they be tested again? That's one subset. And then are you still recommending once a week or maybe multiple times a week, even though right now the focus seems to be on greater representation of the campus?
Yeah, no, I mean, once a week is a recommendation. We're not turning anybody away. We don't have the capacity to do that in real time anyway. But no, I mean, bring it on. I would say every 2 weeks is sort of a minimum that we want. So once a week is certainly Joshua's recommendation. And as for people who've previously tested positive, I mean, we've actually had a number of those, as I mentioned, and we're still detecting virus, so it's not necessarily that useful. 3 months is a number I've heard, but we don't really know. I mean, there's no threshold of the amount of virus in your system that says that you're actually infectious. I know some people are actually testing at 30-fold. So there's a high school program in Memphis testing at 30-fold, and they know they're missing the weak ones that we're detecting. We don't want to go that way. But they're arguing that high titer would be the infectious people. I actually don't believe that. I don't think that the data is that there's a small number of people who are super spreaders, but there's no data saying that those people are people with high titers. So we sort of, we're encouraging as many people as possible and going for breadth.
Yeah, let me add to that a couple points. First of all, with respect to frequency, I'm going to continue to push this notion of once per week. And if you've been tested, don't think that that's a reason to not go back, because you got to make space for others. As Greg said, there's not a line. There's not a capacity yet. Please go. So if you have been tested, putting it on your schedule, finding a time that works for you in your schedule and coming back weekly is ideal. If you haven't been tested yet, head on over to one of the fixed locations or one of the mobile sites, get tested. And I think once you've had the first experience of going there and realizing it's non-invasive and it's relatively fast and the data comes back quickly, you're going to be more inclined to come back repeatedly. With respect to people who've been infected before and then questions of protective immunity and so on, the CDC recently had some guidance with respect to this notion of 3 months, that people who've been tested positive and then recovered were not necessarily advised to have repeat testing for a 3-month period. Let me just parse that a little bit, because it got misinterpreted in the press. What the implication is that individuals who've recovered are likely protected from reinfection for at least a 3-month period. We expect protective immunity to last longer, but obviously the CDC wants to be cautious there, and in some sense unknowable beyond a certain point because of how new SARS-CoV-2 is. With respect to the meaning of if you've been infected before and you get a PCR positive, the understanding, this is something, again, that goes through stamps. The interpretation from the CDC is that such individuals, even though they are PCR positive, are unlikely to be infectious. And so that's something that becomes a discussion over its stamps. But we are advocating for people who have been tested and who had COVID before, who've recovered. If they've been tested, it'll show up as a sample positive, but that individual then has a discussion, and it doesn't necessarily trigger all the same set of sequences, because the diagnostic side then understands that that person has some context. But from the surveillance side, we want to continue to aim for this once-a-week testing. So I think I covered the two major points.
Yeah, thanks both of you. That was really clear. Very good question in the chat that in some ways moves beyond this, beyond the science, which is, do we have the proper communication channels ready to reach out to dorm RAs, leaders of fraternities and sororities? I mean, we have some information about where on campus testing is not occurring. How do we get that information across, assuming that folks there want to be tested?
I will try to field that one. I don't know if, Greg, you were going to or not, but I'll just try to field it, which is that at present, this is a surveillance program. Because it's a surveillance program, it's possible to get information in aggregate about the status of a particular residence hall. And we have also communicated, and I think the Institute as a whole is aware of the importance of communicating in aggregate to groups so that they can recognize potentially that there's an opportunity there or a need, not just an opportunity, to increase testing frequency. With respect to mandates, as we've said, I mean, the issue there is it removes, let's say, the onus on an RA who has to then deal with a fellow student. I'd like to not focus it on them. Their jobs are hard enough as it already is, and remove that onus by essentially moving more to a mandate, which involves a frequency, because then I think we solve that problem campus-wide. But clearly communication out to groups as a whole, that can be done by the university, and a mandate then could make that more granular, again, without turning it into a question of enforcement by an RA, which, I'm hesitant about that, and I think there are some other problematic features which have been raised in other contexts. So that would be my preference.
Yeah, my answer is going to be my answer is a little bit more direct. So I start my day 3 days a week with an 8:30 meeting with a dozen people who are the directors of housing, directors of communication, directors of Greek system, just really dedicated people getting up and working on this. And then I have an hour-long meeting every day at 11 o'clock with the Office of the President and various campus leaders who are really deeply engaged in getting this working. So there are an enormous number of people spending an enormous amount of time on this, engaging psychologists, engaging whatever we can to try to get the word out. But ultimately, as I said earlier, there's nothing like peer pressure.
Except for a mandate.
Is your name Donald or something?
Sorry, my mute got unmuted temporarily. Mike got it.
All right, very good question about some other universities that you guys have actually mentioned, where things have turned to the worse pretty quickly. Can you run us through the scenarios of I mean, these are universities who are doing testing also, and so the question really is, what happened? Like, what's the scenario where that happens so quickly?
I emailed with a Michigan State guy the other day, and he was just desperately disappointed because we didn't model our program, we developed it in parallel. They're going to keep testing for research purposes and graduate population and try to keep the university open that way. But I think in their case, it was just a matter of, it's a 50,000 student strong university, and they didn't get to that minimum threshold that you needed, and probably couldn't, because even though they were testing in more than us. So it really is about catching the hot spots, catching the high risk audience, and relative to the size of your population. We have two things going for us, right? So one is we're a relatively small campus with a relatively small residential footprint, and the other is that we actually appear to have started out at a lower rate than we thought we would. But if we let down our guard, that won't be the case a month from now. Joshua, do you have any data on what actually happened in specific outbreaks?
I don't, and I'll just point out just one caution, which is that a colleague of mine who works in the same space, epidemic modeling space, also trying to implement a testing program. There is some stochastic nature to outbreaks. So there's some element of, even if all plans well spent, there can still be an element of chance. Now, we can try to remove those elements of chance by increasing testing. I want to go back to this notion of super spreaders or super spreading. There are definitely individuals who infect a disproportionate number of others. And right now for COVID-19, the estimates are something like 15 to 20% of the people are infecting about 80% or above of others. Meaning if I look at 89% of the cases, there's a smaller subset of people. The key word here is super spreading events. Yes, there are individuals associated with that, but it's often the event that is really the issue. And maybe it's because in other contexts it's been a manufacturing facility or another school setting. Maybe was it just about that person, or is it just a person in that context, and that led to the large amount of cases? So going back, it's clear that large spreading events have happened. Biogen, Choir, YMCA camp in North Georgia, Jerusalem High School, young adults transmit. I think the operational assumption should be as much as anyone else. The risk for severe infections is obviously higher for older individuals, but there can be severe consequence for younger individuals. So with respect to trying to have a strategy that gets high percentages in each of these high-density live-learn environments, that is, to me, critical. If we are not doing that, then it's possible there could be an outbreak and there could be levels of transmission that are no longer able to be mitigated, and also we don't then have the capacity, whether for quarantine and isolation, to keep up with the caseload. So the whole point is to try, as Greg said, to reduce it so that the number of cases this week is actually at the same level or even less than it was last week. Right? And part of that is hitting different places. If we're 90% in dorm A and 0% in dorm B, that is not equivalent to 50% everywhere. Right? That is not the same thing.
But I mean, so far, things have been spread out. We've not got a concentration. Of the 25 cases are actually, in all but one case, in different dorms or houses or off-campus people. So we haven't seen a cluster yet. But it's a fair bet, I think, that some of these events associated with rush are probably not helping. That the bonfires and the other things happening, where, I mean, there is some evidence today that there's a small cluster from stamps, I believe, or maybe just contact tracing events. So, you know, it's not at this point classrooms, obviously, because the classrooms aren't engaged. It's the events that are happening in and around the residences where we're going to see outbreaks this week. And, you know, we all just worry about, you know, nucleating these big events, that those clusters where you've got 50 people without masks and without social distancing, that's where it's going to happen.
Okay, we're nearly to 6 o'clock, so I want to give each of you a chance to sum up some of the things that you've told us, the most important things you've told us. So maybe each of you could take a couple of minutes and summarize, and then we'll close.
Alexa first.
Sure, I'll go first. So just in summary, I just want to encourage everybody to download the Novid app. Tell your friends, anybody who is sort of in your environment, whether it's a dorm or a frat or anything, to go ahead and download the Novid app. It will definitely help in terms of identifying early on people who have been in contact with people who have tested positive. This will lead to the ability to isolate those folks sooner, and which will lead to trying to help prevent the spread. So definitely download the Novid app. That's my plug.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just incredibly proud of the job that everybody on this program has done. I mean, it's working. Our scheme, the double positive scheme, is just every day I look at a new result, I'm like, wow, it just works. And we're finding people, we're getting them off. We're very lucky we've got a low initial rate. And, you know, Mike Shannon and Julianne Williamson and those teams have just really got us in a position where we can get this to work. I'm optimistic. I really do feel like if we can get participation rates up, we've got a shot at this, which I wouldn't have said a month or 3 weeks ago. I would have, if I was a betting man, I would have said we'll be shut down by the end of September. I don't think that's going to be the case right now, but if we let our guard down, it will. And if we don't get participation up to 80% at least, then we're running a fine line.
And I'll just follow up on that from the modeling side, again, with kudos to all the folks in the team, because I've interacted with them, and it's just incredible what they've put together. To the extent to which I've tried to explain the rationale for the frequency, but it's also really the scale at which this is able to cover all individuals in about 1 week's time, that would be my central message. Due to the hard work of many, there's the capacity on this campus to test all those who live, learn, in addition to more, those who are coming into campus. And that should be the goal. And if it takes a mandate to do it, then that's what we should do in a short period of time. And we've advocated for that. Others have too, so you can use your voice to express that. We hope with that, in combination with mask and awareness of social distancing and this reduction of gatherings, including hybrid learning that is focusing initially at the start at online learning, we can continue to buy ourselves time and reduce circulating cases on campus.
All right. Thanks to all of you. And I think, once again, this is very important. As you know, Georgia Tech has a mantra, which is that we want people to ask the question, what does Georgia Tech think? And you guys are doing that for us. You're telling us what the science says, and you're telling us how we should think and how we should operate in this pandemic. So I want to thank you again on behalf of the audience, on behalf of the school.
Todd, I forgot to say, I was expecting a question about, there's a rumor that George P. Durdell tested positive. I can neither confirm nor deny that. I'm sorry. But he has participated. I will tell you that.
Okay. So I think in closing, we will once again post this presentation, and there may be opportunities in a couple of weeks for us to revisit this topic or topics like this with another town hall. So I think it would be great if we were able to do this in 2 weeks and we were able to see these participation levels increase. That, I think, would be the goal of this presentation, where we're letting the science speak for the scenario. So once again, thank you, and I think we'll close with that.